give you some of my experience with things. Again, a lot of this is just from my experience, my preferences. Everybody's a little bit different, and that's okay. When I first got into sailing, I really didn't know what I was looking at, quite frankly. I didn't research it enough. Did a little bit of research, but I was looking for something economical that I could fix up and get sailing fairly quickly. I found this boat, been back in the yard for almost 15 years on the hard. But the thing about it was the basic hull was in very good condition. Topside needed a little bit of work, but the hull was in good shape. The mainsail was okay. The jib was questionable, but I've been using it for 9 years, so how bad could it have been? But the big thing was the engine, the Yanmar 2-cylinder, and I think it's 16 or 18 horsepower, was basically new. The owner put it in. A couple months later, traded the boat off for a bigger boat. So when I got this boat, there's a long story behind it, but we're not going to get into all that. The key is that the engine was basically new. So what I paid for the boat was less than what a new engine would cost in another boat. And depending on your situation and how you want to do things, I mean, you see some of these cruising videos on YouTube, the sailing people. Most of them start out in a smaller boat, or they start off in a project boat. It's taken them a year, 2 years, 3 years to really rebuild the whole boat. Whatever you want to do, that's fine. Just have a plan, stick to the plan the best you can, and you'll get it to happen. My plan was get the boat in seaworthy condition, pass Coast Guard inspection if I ever got inspected, have the safety things, and start cruising, and as I go along, I would fix things up. And that's what I've been doing for the past 9 years. Not all of the stuff on this boat happened within the first year or 2 years. I mean, it took me some time to get everything together. But when you're looking at a boat, that's something to consider, how handy you are and what you can do. Now let's talk about some of the other things when looking at a boat. I mentioned my main and my jib. Okay, so what's your sail package? A lot of people, that's basically all they have is a jib and a main. Maybe they have a backup somewhere. But there's other packages to get too, other sails to get. Well, actually, I have a Genoa. All right, the difference between a Genoa and a jib is the percentage of sail from the head sail to the mast. Now a jib will usually be like 120%, maybe 115, which means it'll go from the head sail past the mast X amount. A Genoa is going to be like 140, 150% of that. So a Genoa will go past the mast maybe like 140%, 150%. I'm not sure. So you have more sail than your main. And are you going to have a backup of either of those on board? Another thing to consider is a storm jib and what's called a trysail or a storm main. Now, unless you're planning on cruising offshore, out in the ocean, those probably aren't necessary. I mean, here on the Chesapeake Bay, yeah, I've been out in 20, 25 knot gust winds, 30 knot gusts, not intentionally, but I was able to reef my Genoa in. The difference is between just reefing the Genoa in and having a storm jib is the storm jib is going to be more substantial at all the connection points. It's going to be beefed up a little bit. It's not going to be as big. It's going to be easier to handle, and it's not going to put as much stress on your mainsail or on the mast as having the Genoa part way up, and that's putting a lot of pressure on. It's putting a lot of pressure on the sail too. The same with the trysail. That can be set up, and a lot of times you'll see them set up with a separate track just for the storm sail. That's kind of extreme, I think, for our basic cruiser. For racers that are out on the ocean, probably a necessity. So you have that, and then you have a spinnaker. And I think we all know what those, you see them, they're bright colors, they're big. I mean, they're for downwind running, and they just look so pretty, and it makes everybody feel so good. May need one of those too. I don't happen to have one. I don't think I would have ever used it if I had. But those are some of the sails to consider to have in your package. Another thing to think about, which I didn't think about it at all when I got this boat, I just happened to, I guess, luck out as to where the traveler is. What that is it helps move the boom starboard or port for better windage. Mine happens to be on the deck. It's not in the way of getting into the boat or out of the boat, in the cockpit, into the salon. Some of them are further back. Some of them are higher up, almost like on an arch. So where the traveler is may be something of interest to you. So kind of take a look at that. Think about it. I don't think it's that big a deal, but I'm glad my traveler is not in the cockpit area. It gives me a lot more room, and it's easier to move around. So let's talk a little bit about furling systems. Now the jib or the Genoa usually are on a furling system that you just have to pull the line in and it wraps around, or pull your sheets out and it opens it up, or a hang-on system which you clip on as you raise it up the stay on the mast. Either one is fine. The roller system on the jib is a lot easier to work, especially short-handed. You can reef it easier. It's easier to deploy and to bring in. You don't have a lot of sail sitting on the bow of the deck. I happen to like the furling system I have. I think it really works out good. Another furling system, though, is for the main. There's a couple of different things here. There's an in-mast, which here you see this little triangle coming out. That's an indication of an in-mast furler. The plus and minuses to that, the plus is, of course, it's easy to handle by yourself. It's easy to reef. The negative is if it gets jammed up in there, it's not being wound in tight enough, you're going to have a hard time deploying it or getting it back in. Also, on the sail, there are no battens, and we'll talk about battens in a couple minutes here. So that's one system. Another is an in-boom furling system. Same thing, but instead of the main coming out the mast, it's going out the boom. Same issue, so if it gets jammed up. The only thing is, if it gets jammed up and you can't get it in, you can still drop that and not have a problem. You can fix it later. You may not be able to pull it back up all the way if you needed to, but at least you can get that down. Three other systems of handling the main when you drop it is just free fall. Okay, well, it's just going to fall down all over the deck and everything. Another popular one, though, is called a Dutchman, and that is what I have here. It's two lines going up the backstay, attached to the backstay, and then the Dutchman line is woven kind of like in and out of the sail, and there's special things on the sail for that, and when it drops, you flake it back and forth and it kind of falls into place. That works out pretty good. Another one is called the lazy jack, and the lazy jack is just lines on each side of the boom going up to the backstay, and when you lower the sail, no, I'm sorry, they don't go up to the backstay, they go up to the mast, angled back to the mast, so that when you drop the sail, these lines hold it in place so it doesn't flop around. Again, I guess you kind of like train the mast to flake itself, and it does. I mean, mine flakes itself pretty well when I drop it. But then in addition to the lazy jack, you have a sail pack, which is a combination of the lazy jack and a cover for your mast or for your sail, so that you don't have to pull everything out and unwrap it and tie it and zip it. This just falls into that pack and you zip it shut. And so we mentioned battens earlier. So battens are pieces of, usually they're like a fiberglass or a type of a metal type of thing that's sewn into, or has a sleeve where you can put it into the main to help keep the shape of the main. And they come in different styles. Some of them might be just a quarter toward the end of the sail. Some might be half, some might be full. But now if you're doing one of the roller systems, you're not going to have battens. So your sail is made differently to help keep the rigidity without the battens. So electronics are important. When I got this boat, there were a lot of gauges. Just none of them worked. Nothing worked. But the things that you really need, you have to have really, is a VHF, a depth sounder, and on the bay that's very, very important, and a compass. And as I went along, I added things. So I didn't have a depth sounder even. So I went out and I bought an inexpensive fish finder, and I was able to fix that up almost like a hockey puck, or a through, not a through hole. I didn't want to drill holes in the boat. Just for, this was not going to be my permanent depth sounder. So I was able to put a adhesive to it, stick it into the hull where I didn't have any air bubbles. It didn't dry and become hard. It still stayed a little pliable, and that worked out really well for about 4 years, and then it broke down. Now I did get a regular depth sounder before that, but I used that. And then even my compass, couldn't really read the compass. I had a handheld compass that I used. I eventually got a Ritchie compass, mounted that. That works out really great. I started off with a handheld VHF. Now I have a fixed mount and the handheld. Didn't have any chart plotter at all. I just used the charts, pair of binoculars, slide or dividers, and that's what I used for a while. I did eventually get a chart plotter, but in today, I mean, you know, I hardly use the chart plotter, except that I have it hooked up to my VHF so I can get AIS signals for bigger vessels. But I just use this tablet and a software program for my navigation, and this is GPS enabled. It's really, I mean, I can zoom in, I can do all kinds of things with that. So the navigation is really a lot easier today than it was even just 4 or 5 years ago when I started this. The one thing I wish I did have, and which I'm hoping to get, is radar. And a lot of the boaters I know that have radar, they don't use them, and I don't know why. I had a boat that had radar, and I used it all the time. Now, yeah, there's AIS, but that gives you the bigger vessels. There's a lot of small vessels like myself that don't transmit AIS, so you don't know what's going on. I could tell you stories after stories of how the radar on my other boat was so helpful. Heavy fog rolling in, night cruising, it picks up the small fishing boats, even like offshore here along the Jersey coast. In the fog, it starts kicking in, you can see the smaller fishing vessels out there on that. AIS isn't going to help you with that. So radar is a consideration. I know it's not cheap, but I really liked it. Other important things to consider are your fuel tank size and your freshwater holding tank size. And if you have a marine head, what's the blackwater holding tank? Now we took ours out. It was a very small holding tank. I think it was like 8 gallons. That's not a lot. And we put a composting toilet in, and we're much happier with that. And now for some of the creature comforts that you may want to consider. Does the boat have heating and air conditioning? If not, is there room to put it in? And guys, believe me, it is very, very easy to install an HVAC unit on a boat. I mean, I've done it on this little boat. The hardest part is running the ductwork. And then when the water's too cold to use the reverse cycle heat on the HVAC, I've got a small Park diesel heater that keeps this boat nice and toasty. So what's your ventilation system? Do you have fans? Do the port lights open? That's another thing. My port lights don't open. So having that HVAC and the fans help keep the air moving. Other creature comforts are the lighting. All of this is LED lighting in here. Refrigeration instead of an ice box. I had an ice box when I first got the boat. I converted it to refrigeration with the Cool Blue and the big cold plate. And the idea behind that is, first of all, it's air cooled. I don't have any holes drilled in the boat to circulate water to cool anything. The cold plate, once that gets cold, it'll keep that refrigeration at temperature for hours. So my refrigeration unit, the compressor, only kicks on 4 or 5 times a day, where others are cycling on and off every half hour, every 45 minutes. Well, that's draining your battery. So, and in addition to the refrigeration, what are you going to cook on? Is it going to be a propane stove? Is it going to be electric? Is it going to be alcohol, which is really kind of dangerous, I think. The propane is probably the safest and the best route to go. Electric, of course, you're going to need shore power or some kind of system to generate enough electricity to get that hot enough. So how are you going to cook? I mean, you don't need a 3-burner stove and an oven. Those are nice to have. I've got a nice setup. I've got a 2-burner stove and an oven, propane. I got a small 2.5 gallon tank. It lasts me a month, and I cook almost every day on board. So, it doesn't take a lot of propane on these kind of stoves. They're very efficient. And we talked about freshwater tank size. Well, how do you get the water from the tank to your sink or your shower? Some boats have just a foot pedal. This boat only had a foot pedal, no pressure system. So I did install a pressure system that works off of DC power. That's a lot more convenient. Now we do wind up using a little bit more water that way. But if you're going to be staying on the boat for any period of time, pressure water is good. Water heater. Didn't have a water heater. I have a water heater on board now, where before I had to put a pot of water on the stove, heat that up, use that to wash the dishes. And you can do that for a while. Again, is there enough room on the boat to add these things? I had to really look and do a lot of measuring to find out where I could put that hot water heater or hot water maker to get that to work for me all right. Another thing that I did, because we spend a lot of time at marinas, is I put an adapter on the stern of the boat so I could hook up to the shore power or to the shore water, and it's a special adapter. It's got a backflow preventer on it, and when you disconnect the hose and you're using your inside pressure water, that stops it from pushing out, makes the whole system work. And when we talk about creature comforts, of course, where are you going to sleep? Now on this boat I've got a quarter berth, which we mainly use for storage. Then there's a bench seat that can be used into a bed, and the V berth. Would be nice if the boat were a little longer and a little wider. We could have an actual cabin, but it's not a necessity. If you've got kids and you're going to be doing a lot of cruising, you may want to make sure you find a boat that's got at least one cabin and a V berth to it. Other creature comforts that you may not think of at the time, but a dodger, and that's what it is. You know, you dodge the wind, the waves coming over. Enclosures makes it nice. Now I don't have enclosures, but in the wintertime I put some plastic around and just clip it on, and it makes like a little porch. Or in the summer when it's super hot, I've got the sunscreens that let the wind come through but don't overheat. And if you're thinking about doing a lot of anchoring out and some cruising, power management, and not just the engine, I'm talking about your DC power, AC power. So are you going to have room to add solar panels if it doesn't have solar panels, or add a generator, a wind generator? Now the problem with wind generators are that they say they're noisy. Okay, by that it's not like bang bang. There's that constant hum, and sometimes there's a little vibration in it that you're going to feel. The other thing is, and I didn't think about this, but one of my boat neighbors told me this. They have a wind generator, but they're going to solar, because when they anchor out, and anytime you anchor out, you want to try to anchor in a protected zone, an area where you're not going to get blasted by the wind and rocked all over. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose of the wind generator. But if you're there for a couple of days, solar panels, you're going to be able to keep your batteries charged up. So think about how the boat's laid out, and can you add a solar panel arch to it, or does it have an arch? Now on mine, I built my own solar panel arch. I mean, it was a couple $1,000s to buy a pre-made arch, and you still had to cut it and make it fit. This I just made out of speed rail for a couple $100, and it's worked out very, very well. I'll put a link in the description below of how I built that thing. And so communication on the boat, much easier than it ever was before with cell phones. I mean, you know, I used a tablet, I got the cell phone. Most marinas have free Wi-Fi that's very good. Some of them, maybe not so good. But your cell phone plans usually have unlimited data, so staying connected is a lot easier. I can remember when we first started boating, and I had a little bit of an issue where I grounded ourselves, and we were going to be there for a while, and our kids were still at home. I mean, they were high school, it wasn't like they were little kids. I didn't have a phone to call them, but I had the VHF radio. So I got on that, and I was able to make a land call. And you can still do that too. I mean, I forget the whole process of that, but it was really kind of neat. I got on and I called the operator, gave him the phone number I was going to, and it was a brief conversation, but it actually worked. And I'm sure it still works today. But with the cell phones today, staying connected and communicating, much, much easier. Well, guys, I'm sure there's a lot more that we could talk about on this. And I'll probably think of it when I'm done editing here. But this gives you a few more things to look at, help you make the right decision on getting the boat that you're really going to enjoy and have fun out there. Now, in our next episode, we're going to talk about marinas, where you're going to keep the boat. So stay tuned, and until next time, happy and safe boating to you, your family, and friends.